Chuck Yeager's story begins in the quiet hills of Lincoln County, West Virginia, where the night sky felt close enough to touch, and the clear air carried the hum of passing aircraft like an invitation. Born on February 13th, 1923, Charles Elwood, Yeager grew up with calloused hands from working in his father's natural gas drilling business and a keen eye for detail, sharpened by days spent hunting squirrels to bolster the family table. What distinguished him even then was a restless curiosity that refused to treat any piece of machinery as a sealed mystery. He dismantled farm equipment to see how gears mated or how fuel fed a piston, and he could trace a misfire by sound alone. That mechanical empathy, combined with exceptional eyesight, would later define his path in the air. Yet in those early Depression-era years, flying seemed as distant as the moon. War, global politics, and supersonic records were abstractions compared with the tangible rhythm of rural chores and Sunday baseball games played on dusty diamonds beneath tall oaks. When the United States Army Air Forces opened enlistee training, in 1941, Yeager joined as an aircraft mechanic, thinking practical skills would offer steady pay and a way to serve without leaving the comfort zone of engines and wrenches. Fate intervened during a routine ferry flight, when senior pilots noticed how calmly the young corporal handled the controls while taxiing a bomber across the ramp. His raw talent earned him a recommendation for flight school, despite the fact that he lacked the college education typical of aspiring officers. In the trainers at primary school, he displayed a natural flair for precise maneuvering, sensing air currents through the stick as though the machine were an extension of his own nervous system. By February 1943, he had graduated as a flight officer, soon mastering the Republic P-47 before transitioning to the sleeker North American P-51, which he christened Glamorous Glenn, after his sweetheart, Glennis Dickhouse. The name painted beneath the canopy became shorthand among squadron mates for a pilot who flew with the relaxed confidence of a barnstormer, yet studied engine charts late into the night to coax every ounce of performance from Merlin cylinders. England, in late 1943, greeted the 357th Fighter Group with damp airfields carved from beet farms and the constant thrum of four-engine bombers departing before dawn. Yeager, assigned to the 363rd Fighter Squadron, entered his first operational sorties, escorting daylight raids toward continental rail yards. At 20, he was younger than many of the aircrew he shepherded, but his calm radio voice and willingness to share tricks for navigating turbulence won trust quickly. His first aerial success came after a tense mid-morning rendezvous over Brittany. Spotting a trio of opposing fighters glinting against thin cirrus, he banked smoothly, closed distance while maintaining sun advantage, and with measured bursts persuaded one adversary to break away trailing vapor. The moment lasted seconds, yet its psychological weight lingered. Yeager later reflected that he never felt triumph at removing an aircraft from the sky, only relief that his calculations and training held true. Over the next months, he repeated that delicate balance between discipline and instinct, eventually accumulating 11.5 confirmed victories, each a testament to split-second judgment rather than aggression. March 5, 1944, brought an abrupt turn when Yeager, escorting bombers toward Bordeaux, felt his P-51 shudder from a propeller strike. Smoke filled the cockpit. Instruments spun without logic. He trimmed for level to bleed speed, then ejected at low altitude. Landing in a thicket near Angoulême, he buried his parachute and maps before nightfall. Local villagers, risking harsh reprisals, guided him to members of the French resistance who specialized in exfiltrating downed airmen. For weeks he moved by bicycle and on foot, sleeping in barns, practicing French phrases to blend in when checkpoints loomed. The journey across the Pyrenees tested endurance, hewn from Appalachian hikes, frostbitten feet, sparse food, and the constant menace of patrols. At one mountain pass, He improvised crampons from scrap wire to keep traction on icy slopes. Finally, crossing into neutral Spain, he reported to British officials who facilitated his return to England. Regulation dictated that evaders should not resume operations over the same theatre to protect clandestine lines, but Yeager petitioned, arguing that his mechanical knowledge of German aircraft and familiarity with escort tactics outweighed any security risk. The appeal reached General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who granted permission, citing Yeager's value to morale. Back with the 357th, Yeager sharpened his situational awareness, often guiding less experienced pilots through cloud breaks or teaching. He'd them how to gauge closure rates by noting exhaust flicker. October 12, 1944, became his defining airborne performance when within a single hour he neutralized 5 opposing fighters threatening a bomber formation. The feat drew headlines, yet he deflected praise, crediting teamwork and the Mustang's high-altitude advantage. He later mused that arithmetic, not bravado, underpinned success, knowing when to climb, when to conserve horsepower, and when to disengage before fuel margins melted away. By VE Day, he had completed 64 missions, flown 270 combat hours, and earned decorations for skill under pressure. Returning stateside, he married Glennis in Oroville, California, in a modest ceremony that felt to Yeager, by his own recollection, more nerve-wracking than any sortie because he could not rely on checklists to navigate human emotion. Post-war, demobilization released thousands of pilots into civilian life, but Yeager's heart remained tethered to cockpits. He accepted an assignment at Wright Field as a maintenance officer, where he found mentors among engineers probing high-speed aerodynamics. Jet propulsion promised unprecedented velocities, yet as pilots approached the speed of sound in diving tests, aircraft shuddered under shock waves, leading many to doubt whether controlled flight beyond Mach 1 was possible. Yeager volunteered for the Bell X-1 experimental program, drawn by the challenge and perhaps by the thrill of exploring a frontier no compass charted. In the Mojave Desert at Muroc Army Airfield, he immersed himself in technical briefings on tailplane incidents and rocket fuel mixture ratios, learning to anticipate how compressibility might render elevators sluggish. Despite breaking 2 ribs in a horseback mishap days before the decisive flight, he concealed the injury with help from his crew chief, realizing that official medical grounding would delay the program. On October 14, 1947, with the X-1, nicknamed Glamorous Glennis, to honor the steadfast partner who waited at home, slung beneath a B-29 mother ship, Yeager reviewed emergency procedures while the sun painted orange streaks across Rogers Dry Lake. At 26,000 tons, feet he activated the rocket motor, feeling steady acceleration rather than the jolt some engineers predicted. Passing Mach 0.94, instrument needles quivered, and the aircraft pitched slightly, but adjustments to the horizontal stabilizer restored equilibrium. A moment later, the meter swept beyond Mach 1, and a sonic boom rippled over the desert floor. Inside the cockpit, Yeager reported simply, "I'm still here," capturing with understatement the culmination of centuries of aerodynamic inquiry. The machine behaved predictably, verifying theory and redefining limits not through force, but through measured engineering and pilot intuition. That first supersonic flight lasted only a handful of minutes, yet it shifted the narrative of human capability from legends of Icarus toward disciplined exploration. Recognition followed: feature articles, speaking invitations, and promotion. But Yeager remained focused on the next set of unknowns. He continued testing advanced designs, including the X-1A and X-3, probing stability issues at higher Mach numbers and altitudes that nudged the threshold of space. His candor in post-flight debriefs, unflinching about shortcomings whether personal or mechanical, helped designers refine control systems that later powered Mercury and Apollo capsules. Beyond technical bravado, Yeager emphasized the importance of average young people, himself included, receiving opportunity. He cited his small-town schoolteacher who encouraged geometry lessons relevant to navigation, and the squadron commander, who insisted that attitude outweighed pedigree. In 1954, Yeager transitioned to leadership roles, commanding the Air Force Aerospace Research Pilot School, where he shaped curricula for astronauts before spaceflight carried them above the wisecracking test pilot culture. He insisted students master celestial navigation, human physiology, and systems redundancy, believing that any frontier demanded holistic preparation. During overseas assignments, he evaluated tactical aircraft under operational conditions, sharing insights with engineers who translated field feedback into safer ejection seat designs, or improved instrumentation readability for pilots flying in adverse weather. While political winds shifted through the Cold War, Yeager's approach remained constant: gather data, respect physics, and keep the people around you sharp and honest. Retiring from active duty in 1975 with the rank of Brigadier General, Yeager entered public memory not as a relic, but as an active ambassador for aeronautical education. He supported scholarships for students from rural backgrounds reminiscent of his own, arguing that talent appears everywhere, yet opportunity does not. His autobiography, written in conversational prose, conveyed technical milestones through anecdotes accessible to readers who had never stepped onto a flight line. Hollywood's depiction of him in The Right Stuff showed a man in a leather jacket striding toward a horizon of unformed possibility. Yeager himself preferred to think of that image as symbolic of teams, engineers, riggers, meteorologists, who turned aspiration into repeatable procedure. Throughout the latter decades of his life, Yeager maintained currency at the controls, celebrating the 50th anniversary of his supersonic flight by exceeding Mach 1 again in an F-15 at age 74. Not content merely to relive past triumphs, he used such commemorative flights to highlight ongoing research aimed at reducing sonic boom footprints for future civilian transport. Even in television interviews, he reframed questions about danger into discussions about risk management, underlining that courage without preparation was recklessness. He remained approachable at air shows, autographing photographs for teenagers while reminding them that persistence matters more than perfect grades. When Yeager passed away on December 7, 2020, tributes circled the globe, patterned after the vapor, trails he once commanded. Yet statistics alone, 11.5 victories, Mach records, decades of service, do not fully articulate his resonance. What endures is the notion that boundaries guard secrets until someone equipped with humility, discipline, and a dash of audacity asks the right questions. Yeager's Appalachian upbringing, wartime resilience, and test pilot rigor formed a continuous thread of curiosity that redefined what metal wings could do when guided by human intellect rather than brute force. He demonstrated that exploration, whether over the patchwork fields of Europe or the sun-baked flats of California, thrives on collaboration between insightful designers and pilots who translate mathematics into graceful arcs across open sky. In every classroom, where students experiment with model rockets, in every wind tunnel lab, where engineers sculpt airflow, the silent influence of Chuck Yeager's example persists, a reminder that the barrier most worth shattering is the one we imagine between ordinary beginnings and extraordinary horizons. In the years after retirement, Yeager's calendar filled with projects that kept him close to the sound of turbines and the bright horizon he loved. Corporate flight testing programs sought his insight, not only for the headline value of a famous name, but for the disciplined method he applied to every checklist. He served as a consultant during evaluations of lightweight fighters, such as the Northrop F-20, and later, at NASA's invitation, reviewed cockpit ergonomics for experimental lifting body vehicles. In meetings, he favored plain speech and practical demonstrations. If a switch sat beyond easy reach while strapped into a pressure suit, he would have an engineer trade places with him, close the canopy, and try the same motion to prove his point. That hands-on candor avoided hierarchy and kept the focus on safety, a principle he believed mattered more than any schedule printed in a program office. Yeager also found time for classrooms. He visited high schools in rural districts that reminded him of Hamlin, urging students to look beyond perceived limits of geography or family income. His appearances were never ornate. Wearing a simple flight jacket, he spoke of perseverance as a habit built through small actions, arriving early for maintenance duty, double-checking fuel gauges, reading technical manuals after lights out. Those habits, he explained, prepared him to recognize opportunity when it arrived, as an unexpected letter inviting him to flight school or as a clipboard offering a slot in a rocket plane. After the bell rang, he lingered to answer questions about the feel of Mach 1. He described it not as a jolting wall, but as a smooth push through invisible resistance, a moment when preparation met possibility. Although the era of rocket planes soon gave way to orbital capsules, Yeager remained firmly engaged with developments on the space frontier. He attended launches at Cape Canaveral, listening to countdowns with the practiced calm of a man who had once time-checked fuel pumps at high altitude. Journalists often pressed him to declare whether astronauts or test pilots faced the greater hazard. He demurred, saying that risk was a constant partner in discovery, and the real measure lay in disciplined teamwork rather than degrees of peril. His appreciation for that teamwork extended to mission control specialists, telemetry analysts, even the ground crews who loaded cryogenic propellants at dawn. Each role, he argued, carried equal weight on the long path toward reliable space travel. Through the 1980s and 1990s, he flew heritage aircraft at airshows to raise funds for aviation museums. At Oshkosh, he climbed back into a refurbished P-51, once again painted Glamorous Glen, and executed gentle barrel rolls that made the crowd gasp before settling into a textbook landing. He insisted on modest fees, directing much of the proceeds towards scholarships administered by the Civil Air Patrol and the Aerospace Education Foundation. Those programs awarded private pilot lessons to teenagers who wrote essays about how flight might serve their communities, airlift for medical supplies in remote areas, aerial surveys for wildfire prevention, or simply the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. In private moments, Yeager nurtured quieter interests. He fished mountain streams near Lake Tahoe, guided by the same patience he displayed in flight. Watching a fly land softly on clear water reminded him that mastery lies in subtle adjustments rather than forceful gestures. He compared the arc of an accurate cast to the smooth pull on a control column that keeps an approach stable in gusty wind. Friends recall evenings at his cabin where stories of experimental flights blended with reflections on family. Glenys, whose name adorned his most famous aircraft, shared those evenings until her passing in 1990, after which Yeager spoke often of her steadying influence. He remarried in 2003, finding companionship that sustained his energetic schedule even as his public profile continued to grow, honors accumulated. Induction into the National Aviation Hall of Fame, the Harmon International Trophy, and countless honorary degrees, yet he regarded them as milestones rather than destinations. When asked which accolade mattered most, he pointed to the simple silver wings pinned to his uniform in 1943. Those wings, he said, symbolized a trust placed in him by instructors, crew chiefs, and the wider network of people who maintain a flying organization. Without that foundation, no later achievement, from aerial victories to supersonic records, could have occurred. As the 21st century advanced, Yeager embraced digital outreach. Social media followers received short messages in which he distilled a lifetime of flight test wisdom into one-sentence reminders. Know your machine. Respect the checklist. Never let pride outclimb fuel. He participated in virtual town halls where aspiring aerospace engineers pitched concepts for low-boom transports or electric regional airliners. Rather than critique the novelty of such ideas, he asked pointed questions about weight-to-power ratios, thermal limits, and maintainability. His curiosity remained forward-leaning. He wanted to know how new generations planned to solve the same physics he had confronted in a rocket plane's cramped cockpit. On anniversaries of historic flights, Yeager made appearances at Edwards Air Force Base, the renamed Muroc of earlier days, standing beside the Orange Bell X-1 preserved under museum lights. Around him, modern aircraft with composite skins and glass cockpits taxied under the desert sun. He observed these successes with interest, noting that while materials and avionics evolve, the fundamental relationship between pilot and atmosphere still revolves around understanding lift, drag, thrust, and weight. In a brief speech to graduating test pilot classes, he reminded them that bravery untempered by calculation is merely luck, and luck eventually runs dry. Data, preparation, and the humility to admit uncertainty keep the system safe enough to learn from each flight. In December 2020, when news of Yeager's passing spread, tributes spanned continents. Test centers paused run-ups to observe a moment of silence. Controllers at Edwards cleared airspace so a formation of jets could perform a gentle missing man climb. Students in aeronautics laboratories paused simulations to read excerpts from his autobiography aloud. Across these commemorations ran a single theme. The sky had lost an ambassador who spoke its language in the vernacular of curiosity and discipline. Yet his influence persisted wherever a student plotted a climb angle, or a software engineer built margin into control logic, or an instructor explained why caution and confidence must ride together in the cockpit. Perhaps Yeager's most enduring contribution to aviation culture lies in dissolving the perceived divide between extraordinary feats and ordinary beginnings. By sharing the story of a gas driller's son who learned to read the wind, he framed excellence as a continuous choice rather than a distant pedigree. Every early morning spent inspecting rivets, every evening reviewing flight data, and every respectful collaboration with ground crews constituted a single arc of intention. Breaking the sound barrier, then, was not an isolated flash of daring, but the natural culmination of thousands of such choices, each small, each deliberate, each available to anyone willing to honor detail. Today, as engineers aim for commercial, craft that cross oceans at Mach 2 without leaving disruptive shockwaves, or reusable space planes that glide home through thin atmosphere, they do so equipped with lessons Yeager helped write in vapor across the desert. Future travelers may sit behind tinted windows, unaware that their tranquil passage grew from a time when a young pilot, ribs aching from a fall, trusted data and intuition enough to push past the unknown. Yet on every instrument panel, hidden in the language of design margins and structural tolerances, his legacy remains coded. It says that barriers yield not to bravado, but to steady hands, clear eyes, and a belief that learning tempers risk until what once seemed unreachable becomes a familiar corridor through open sky.